Hi, this is a supplementary lecture for the Executive Black Belt course. This is a short lecture on cost of poor quality, which is a conceptual tool that you usually use early on to ensure that your project is delivering a significant amount of value, and it's also a good way to organize how that is delivering value so you don't underclub or overclub the value of your project. After completing this, after we go through this, you should be able to define needs for finance guidelines to evaluate your projects. You should be able to make a decent estimate of your financial benefits using cost of poor quality, and we'll talk a little bit about hard and soft savings. As you might notice, that cost of poor quality is something that's used very often in the define phase. And the reason why you do this up front is because you want to make sure that this project holds weight or holds water. It's another way of essentially making your business case, and also helping to define what your key outputs are going to be. All right, now one of the things that people mistake this for is very often a cost-benefit analysis. Right now, we're essentially defining sort of pain points. You know, what are the pain points to the business generally that we're seeking to try and minimize or partially or wholly eliminate? We can't do cost-benefit, just to make sure everybody understands this. We can't do cost-benefit yet because we're not yet sure how we're going to implement, what we're going to implement, and the extent that we're going to be able to sort of beat down the errors that we're talking about in the cost of poor quality. Okay? Right now, it's just sort of like an inventory of what's out there. What's the bogey that we can try and get at? Is it $1 million problem or is it a $100 problem? If it's a $100 problem, maybe we ought to put our attention elsewhere. Okay, so the cost of poor quality is, as I said, it's an organizational tool. And the idea is that we're going to divide all of the losses that we have into essentially 4 buckets. The first 2 buckets are the cost of failures. So external and internal failures are sort of the first way that we can think about problems that we can run into, and how to define what the costs are. So that's the first part of this conceptual tool. Our failures, and they're divided into external, which are external failures are things that touch one or more customers in a significant way. In other words, we make a mistake and we don't find it until after it hits the customer. An internal failure is something where we make a mistake, and one way or another we have to fix it internally. All right. Then there's appraisal or inspection. This is one thing that a lot of people don't think of when they think about the cost of poor quality. One of the things that we wouldn't have to do if we always made things correctly was check them. If we think about the cost that it takes us in terms of measuring our quality, inspection, all of that kind of things, those are things that we wouldn't have to do if we got it right in the first place. Okay, and finally, the amount of money that we put into prevention of quality. Things like you taking this particular Six Sigma course, but more to the point, if we're running a project that's improving something, that would be a prevention cost. If we're instituting basic maintenance and instituting business controls or writing PMPs, those are the things that are preventative costs or preventive costs. Okay? Now, the idea is pretty simple, that external failures, right here, these external failures, for every external failure, put it this way, for every dollar that we spend in prevention, it's going to cost us $100 if we have to inspect that out. Okay? I'm sorry, it's going to cost us $10 if we're going to have to inspect that out. It's going to cost us $100 if we make a mistake and have to fix it, and it's going to cost us $1,000 if we didn't prevent it and it actually gets to the customer. Now, these are not exact mathematics or anything like that. This is just a conceptual tool. So the idea is that we not only want to shrink the entire pie as I have on the right-hand side. Notice that the pie is smaller. But we've also shifted it. We've shifted it to nearly zero external failures. That's why the green slice right there is so small. Right, green is very small. But we're also making very few internal errors. So we're preventing errors before they errors and defects before they occur. That's the internal. That's the external. And there's the internal. So you can see external and internal failures, very rare. We are spending some money on inspection, but the bulk of our money is on prevention. Now, we may never get to this, but this is the concept that we're trying to work with, okay? So that's the concept that we're trying to work with. So as we look at this and as we look at the cost of poor quality, obviously it's also a prioritization tool that says, okay, if we're making errors that go outside the company, we ought to try and stamp those out first. All right, let's take a look at what some of those things are. So if we let's start on the right-hand side in external failures. Okay, remember, these are things that get to the customer either before we find them or after we find them and we haven't done anything about it. So here are just some things. Repair and servicing of products in the field. If we make mistakes and we have to fix them out there, costs a lot of money. We have a lot of egg on our face. Warranty claims. These are defective products or defective services where we have to redo them. Complaints. Any returns. Liability. If we make a mistake and the customers sue us, then we would have to pay for not only that litigation but also damages potentially. And finally, loss of goodwill. This is a huge one. I mean, think about how many customers or lost revenue that we have if we haven't, if we mess up and the customer sees that. So those are all the different places and areas where we can mess up, okay? And those are external failures. If we're talking about internal failures, now let's talk about that. Here are a few of the things that are there. And you can see some of this is very manufacturing focused, but we can also talk about how this can be true in the transactional world as well, in the service world. So scrap and downgrading. These are things that we did the work, but it's valueless. So these could be anything from, it could be I'm making, I don't know, I'm making computers, and here's some computers that I messed up on and they're no good, I just have to throw them out. But it also can be projects that I started and never completed. Or it could be work that I started and never completed, I just threw it out. Like if I were writing P&Ps or I had I was writing SOPs and just never completed that. Or I were doing something for a customer order, it never happened, so we could never invoice it. That would be scrap, and that would be downgrading is something a little bit different. That would be saying, well, I did this work, it's not as valuable as I thought it would be, so we're going to give you a discount on the price. In the manufacturing world, you've seen this as sort of the no-brand foods. We messed up, but we'll still use it. We'll just sell it at a lower price because it's lower quality goods. Okay, rework, things that we have to do again. Reinspection. So these are things that, hey, look, if we inspected it once, we may have to rework it and reinspect it again. That's really, we wouldn't even have to do that if we didn't make the mistake in the first place. Waste, very similar to what we've been talking about. Here's another category, any sort of failure analysis or failure research. If we have to have an analyst going into an invoice, understanding what, doing some forensics on that, or we have an engineer going into a machine, trying to figure out what went wrong with the machine, or we have a data analyst going in to something that we delivered to a customer, trying to understand what was wrong with that transaction. All those things are failure analyses, and they cost a lot of money. Okay, and also any late payments or expediting. Those things are important to spike out as well. We weren't able to deliver it on time, or we're only able to deliver it on time if we move it to the top of the list, and that involves a lot of cost, extra labor, or maybe even something as simple as extra postage. Anyway, these sort of ideas should give you a good flavor. Give you a good flavor of what is the cost of getting it wrong. Okay, and that's what I like to call the failure cost, right? So these are the failure costs, the cost of getting it wrong. Oops, the cost of getting it wrong. I'm not trying to cross it off, I'm trying to circle it. There we go. All right. All right. On the other hand, let's move over to the sort of the next one, which is the appraisal cost or inspection cost. There are costs that are associated with verification, quality audits, any sort of inspection equipment. That would be stuff that we would have to pay for in order to check to make sure that we got it right. Okay, so this is the cost of checking to make sure that we got it right. All right, sometimes we have to do vendor ratings too. Somebody will come in, a third party's doing an audit, and we might have to pay for those people to come in and do that third party audit. So those are all costs of checking to make sure it's right. Now, there's a saying among quality professionals that you can't inspect in quality. And while I want to, it is true, and while I do want to emphasize that that's true, no matter how many times you check work, it doesn't get any better when you check it. You actually have to do something. And the cost of doing something is in the internal failure piece. However, I will also say this, that I've seen some departments say, oh, there's a cost in inspection, and go very quickly to almost zero inspections. That's problematic because, of course, if we're making external failures, those are far more costly. So in the short term, I want to make sure that we understand this. So in the short term, this may be a viable alternative to making lots of internal or external errors, particularly external errors, right? It may be a very valuable alternative in the short run. But in the long run, we do want to move to prevention. That's really super important, okay? So keep your eyes on the prize. Long term, we want to move to prevention. We don't want to have to staff with a giant staff in order to prevent in order to check to make sure we didn't make every error, okay? And any error. Or we want to remove as much cost from that as we can by having automatic inspection equipment, that kind of thing. All right. Hopefully that made sense to everybody. Okay, so how do we do this? How do we use the cost of poor quality? Well, I like to first of all start with the failure categories. If I'm thinking about this and I'm thinking about in my project, remember it's in the define phase generally speaking. You know, it's somewhere in here in the define phase we're doing the cost of poor quality. I like to think about, you know, where are the areas that we're actually having external failures, and then I work my way into internal failures. Okay, so I start with the failure categories, and only then do I start you know, kind of writing down what are all the appraisal costs. And I actually do this in an Excel spreadsheet, generally speaking. Okay, now I do want to also start that in the measure phase is often where you have data to support you know, how many errors are we actually making, right? Okay. And then when you build the cost of poor quality algorithm, what I find helpful is usually to ask the question, what is the cost of one type of incident or defect per year? And then ask the question of how many happen in a year. So let me give you an example of that one. Example is given on this one. This is for a furnace repair. So suppose that you are a public utility and you get or maybe you work for Lennox or some company that does furnaces, and you have to go in and service that furnace. You get a call from the customer, maybe a complaint, stopped working, or a warranty claim, stopped working, so you have to go in and do it. So this is actually a decent place to look because it's an external failure. All right, so here's maybe one way that you'd like to try and do it. You try and get an idea of how much each repair costs in terms of, say, what the tasks are. In this case, it's a service call. So you'd want to write down what are all the different tasks. So we've got take the repair call. There's somebody who dispatches this person who goes out to take that. There's the actual repair. There's the administration time. And then there's the time to manage all of those things. And to put in sort of what is the average cost, the average hours per each one of these tasks. You can see that it takes a relatively long time compared to everything else to choose the person who's going to do the repair and to actually have them do the repair and to send them out and to actually have them do the repair. What is the hourly rate for that? And then what is the cost of materials? I guess in this case we have some materials that we have to pay. In many services we won't necessarily have a cost of materials. All right, finally we put together what's the cost of a failure, and it looks like we're estimating it costs about $174 per failure. If we can estimate that there are 1,500 failures per year, we get an annual cost of $261,000. So you can do this, of course, with any sort of defect that you've got. Make some sort of estimate how many times they happen within a year, and it gives you at least a bogey that's out there that says, okay, this is about what this particular defect is going to is costing us per year. And you can do that for all the different types of defects that you've got. Usually 2 or 3 key defects are what you want to try and just get an estimate for. All right, hopefully that was good. Now let's talk a little bit about hard and soft savings. A lot of people have a lot of finance departments want to divide things up into hard and soft savings, and the reason why you'll do this is because you'll find that you'll find that there are different things that are cost savings. Clearly there's a benefit to them, but for one reason or other they don't lead to operating cash or something that's easy to measure in an accounting department. Okay, so how do we? So I like to make I have my own opinion about what's hard and what's soft. Okay, but I want to give a very general definition in terms of how usually people interpret that. And that is that usually hard savings are things that we measure in dollars, and soft savings are things that we don't measure in dollars. Now there are some exceptions in dollars. There are some exceptions to this, but and I'll show you one, I think. But or we measure them in dollars, but we don't book them. One way or another. Okay. So some examples of this would be in hard would be direct cost savings, anything that's there. Many people, if we have something that's directly a revenue enhancement, we want to put that in there. If we have something that is directly either a capital reduction, so it helps us remove the amount of money that we have to sink into one area of the business, and that frees up some cash for another part of the business. That's often very hard savings, which is good. And then occasionally we have cost avoidance. So I was going to have to build a new room to house all my archives, and because of a Six Sigma project, I now have plenty of space for my archives. I don't have to run that construction project. That is really a cost avoidance, and that's real hard money. Okay, soft savings are often things like employee satisfaction and customer satisfaction, but they could also be things like displaced people. So suppose I eliminated the need for a person in an area, and I currently had 4, but the question of whether I was actually going to go from 4 FTE to 3 FTE was still open. I might count that as soft savings until management actually did something about it. Now, whatever that would be, it could be something from eliminating the position immediately or getting it through attrition, or it could be moving that person to a different area of the business where he or she were needed. How finance defines what's hard and soft is often the key there. Okay, and that last comment I made is really a telling one. And what I wanted to tell everybody is that if you're planning on saying to the rest of the world, which I hope that you do, here's how much value my project brought me. If you want to say, here's what my project value was, in any sort of dollars, you must get some give and take from finance. Make sure you get finance's opinion. Run your COPQ algorithm, right? Whatever that is, it's your way of calculating it. Run it by finance to make sure that at the end, when you want to book your savings and talk about it, that they're okay with that and get their suggestions and make the revisions. I think that's an important thing. Communication is the key on that one. All right, let's take a moment to do this, and what I'd like you to do is if you can do this exercise that's given on page 90, here it's given on page 90 and 91, and it'll be helpful if you don't look at the answer. We'll go through it here. I'll tell you where to stop. Okay, so and you can do it by yourself. You don't have to work with your team. So let's consider a hypothetical project where we have a business that does $200,000 a day in sales, and currently it takes 15 days after, on average, after delivery of a product. Okay, so they're a product company, but it could be a service company just as easily, to provide the customer with an invoice. So we've done the work, we ought to get paid, and it takes us 15 days to get that invoice. 15 days to get the invoice out to them, not to get paid. Okay? Currently, there are 2 full-time salaried positions in the billing department. Each costs a loaded cost of $70,000 per year, $70,000. And each sales rep spends approximately 20% of her time, his or her time, involved in doing the billing. The combined cost of all employment with sales representatives is $650,000 per year. And let's just say the cost of capital for this company is a phenomenal 6.5%. Okay, so that's the background for what this is. Sounds to me like it could be a pretty good project if we've got Salesforce spending 20% of their time doing billing. Okay, so we ran a Lean Six Sigma project, and we were able to reduce the amount of time that it takes to provide an invoice from, here's what happened. Okay, so this is the fast forward to what actually happened. We reduced the time from 15 to 4 days. Okay. Secondly, we improved process reduces the involvement of salaried employees in billing. A decision is made to eliminate a position. Okay, so we're going to eliminate a position in billing. However, it says the displaced person is maintained by the business entity, but they're moved into an entirely new administrative role. Okay, so if we were employing Joe in the billing process, Joe is now moved into a different role where it's deemed that Joe is needed. Okay, finally, now the salespeople only spend 4% of their time involved in the billing process. How would you account for doing this? So spend a little bit of time, stop, do not go on to the next page. And so you might hit the stop button, give yourself a little bit of time to do this. Okay, stop. Okay, here we go. I'm going to show you how I did it. And to do that, I'm going to just go into my Excel spreadsheet. So if we take a look at that, we've got the before and after situation. Before, it took 15 days. Now it takes 4. And the sales per day was 200. And it's still 200 afterward. The improvement was 11 days. So calculating the net working capital benefit is simply it's 143,000, which is 11 days multiplied by that 6.5% multiplied by the 200. So that's what that is right there. Okay, so net working capital benefit of $143,000, and that is a hard savings. Okay, billing department, let's take a look at that. So we used to have 2 employees at a loaded cost of $70,000. Now we have one for a total of $140,000. Now we have one at $70,000 for a total of $70,000. $70,000 cost reduction savings there. That's hard. Finally, we have the sales rep time, which was reduced from 20 to 4%. If we take a look at that, that's essentially an added capacity that we're giving to the sales folks of $104,000 in value-added work, which is the 650 times the 16. That's a value-added work that they could be doing that they weren't doing before. We're going to call that soft. The reason is because it doesn't necessarily translate into sales. All right, if we total that up, we've got a total of 213 of hard savings, which is the net working capital plus cost reduction, and a total of soft savings of $104,000 for a total benefit of $317,000. Now, if you didn't get this answer, don't fret. The important thing is that you did it, right? Okay, because there are some things that are actually, when I do this in a live class with, say, 20 people, I may get 20 different answers. A lot of it has to do with what we count as hard and what we count as soft. For example, let's look at this one. The sales day, the days, not the sales, but the invoice time that it takes to get from 15 to 4 days, improvement of 11 days. A lot of people wouldn't consider that to be hard savings because just because we send the invoice early doesn't mean we're going to get the payment early as well, and that's when we can actually use the cash. So it doesn't necessarily improve the order to cash process. It probably does, and so there's an assumption built in here. If the payment terms were, say, net 30 days, the idea would be customers don't start paying us outside of that net 30 days boundary if they were paying us within it before. Okay, so that's definitely an assumption. Here's another hard assumption, or here's another assumption. Remember that I booked this as a hard savings, but I did mention that the person wasn't actually eliminated, even though the position was. It was deemed that person was moved into another value-added position. Well, that's still a cost of the company is incurring. So again, the key thing is to run this by your finance department and to see where they include, what they want to include, and what's going to be hard and soft. Okay, so hopefully that made a lot of sense to you. Here is exactly that write-up that's at the back. And so now it's time for your time. In your view, what are the key takeaways of this section? What are the key questions that can be answered as a result of this, and how you can support business improvement? Take a little time to write this, and I think that'll help. If we're thinking about a summary, some of the things that we talked about were, remember, the cost of poor quality. It's really just a conceptual model that has failure in external failures and internal failures, appraisals or inspection, and then finally the cost of prevention. Usually you want to focus on external and internal failure, and then mosey on down to inspection costs as things that you want to try and eliminate or reduce in your project. Okay, other big takeaway, at least for me, is involve finance early and often. Should be like voting in Chicago. Okay, take care, and we'll see you in the next lecture.